All right. Hey, welcome to this bonus material on the Postcards from a Dying World review of Feral by James Demanaco and B.K. Evenson. With me today is Marvin Vernon, who is one of my favorite critics of the horror genre out there in the blogosphere. Marvin's reviews are some of my go-tos. So, Marvin, why don't you give your background, and then I'll give mine for those who are just discovering us through Brian Evenson, which I think there's probably a lot of listeners.
Okay, sound good. I'm Marvin Vernon, and I'm a book reviewer and critic. I have spent pretty much my entire life being basically a fan, and now that I am retired in my own career, I have been doing a lot of reviewing and nonfiction writing about mainly horror, science fiction, and mystery. My blog is called The Novel Pursuit. And I also review quite a few, over 1,000 books on my Goodreads page. I also review for a few websites, which are see if I get the name right, Hell Note, the Horror Review, and By Zombie. And I also, my reviews also show up in the Dark Discovery, which is a magazine on horror and science fiction.
Right, awesome. And I think I first discovered your reviews on Hell Notes, and then basically started paying more attention when you gave positive reviews to my books, which was cool. But then I started reading all your reviews and really enjoyed them. So I'm David Agranoff, and I'm an author. Most of my books are on Deadite Press or arms of Eraserhead Press. My probably top-selling book is The Vegan Revolution with Zombies. And my most recent is Punk Rock Ghost Story, and I have a science fiction novel coming out this summer called Flesh Trade. And I come to this being a massive Brian Evenson fan. So why don't we just get into Feral now? So I'm not going to assume that everybody listening are Brian Evenson fans, although I feel like we'll probably get a lot of Brian Evenson fans. So Brian Evenson, for those of you who don't know, is an author who is most well known for writing books of really high class literature that skirts horror and science fiction. In fact, the first time I ever looked to find one of his books after I saw him at a reading from the book Last Days, I couldn't find him at first because I looked in the horror section and he was shelved in Powell's in Portland under literature, which was quite a surprise to me. But then I realized that he had quite a noted career in literary fiction, and went on to discover his work. So he is a co-author of Feral with the film director and screenwriter James Demonaco. And this book is published by Blumhouse Press. It is I think most people are calling it kind of a traditional zombie novel. However, I think that's one of the things we're going to end up discussing in a little bit is Feral a traditional zombie novel? So let me just give a quick synopsis of the book. The main character is named Allie Hiltz, and she, we see the beginning of her story 3 years before the apocalypse really takes off, and then she, sorry, I got a little distracted pulling up my notes. She is a survivor of a pandemic which affects only men. And basically what happens is the men are turned into fast zombies, like raging maniacs. And this sets up a kind of battle of the sexes apocalypse. So, I guess what I would want to discuss with you, Marvin, is that one of the first things I talked about in my review was that a lot of people are calling this a traditional zombie novel, and I'm not so sure that it is. I kind of put it more under the high concept apocalypse, more not quite to the level of like a, let's say, John Shirley's Demons or Tim LeBon's The Silence, which is all about sound and, you know, being quiet and being hunted down because of, you know, making sound, which is a very high concept apocalypse. However, it looks like a zombie novel, but more in the sense of maybe comparing it to The Girl with All the Gifts is to me, Feral is the zombie concept with a little extra added to it, and with this Battle of the Sexes thing, which I actually think becomes more important than the zombie aspects of it.
I would pretty much agree with that. I find the novel does take some basic ideals that you will find in zombie novels. I keep thinking of Walking Dead for some reason. I thought there was some main similarity there. But the ideal itself, which is men becoming feral, is not something you really see, and that does go on farther as we discover another character in the novel, and that kind of puts a different tone to it. So I would agree it does swivel off somewhat with it, but it does use the basic idea of the zombie novel.
Right, which The Girl with All the Gifts did as well. You've read that as well, right, Marvin?
Actually, I saw the movie. I have not read the book.
Oh, you've not read the book. Okay, but you know the concept because you've seen the movie.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and to me, like, and I'll admit, I think The Girl with All the Gifts is maybe a superior work, like doing this thing of like expanding on the zombie genre. Even though I personally believe Evenson is a better writer than M.R. Carey, but we do know that Evenson is probably not the originator of this concept. James Demonaco is probably the originator of the concept because I believe Evenson was hired, much like he was with Lords of Salem by Rob Zombie, to kind of work from a treatment or a screenplay. I'm not really sure. I'll find out when I interview Evenson tonight, which will also be on this blog post. But, you know, one of the things that's interesting to me about this novel and the way it unfolds is that, you know, in the beginning, I don't know how much you read about it before you started. I went in totally cold. And so I didn't know anything. And so in the beginning, we have like introduction to Allie as a character before the apocalypse kind of happens. And then there's a 3-year shift, right? And I think we get just a tiny glimpse into what boys can do to young girls with this kind of storyline of the internet shaming that happens at the beginning. And, you know, then we shoot ahead and we have this strong female character. And I think that's one of the things that for me, you know, kind of separates it. But I know some people like had a problem with that 3-year shift. I'm not sure. I wonder how you felt about the prologue and the 3-year shift, like early on in the book.
Well, I liked it.
Yeah.
I felt it worked pretty good. We were given a little backstory. Well, not so much backstory, the prologue. And then getting to the 3-year shift, we went into basically the meat of the novel. And we also were given an idea of why Hallie became how she is, which her protection of her sister. By the way, I want to say that I knew nothing about the novel, too, when I got it. I got it about 2 months before it came out at the review copy. Mm-hmm. So I went into it pretty much not expecting anything.
Right. So, and I think that, it's fair to say that I'm probably more of a fan of the novel than you are, although I'm not, this is not even my favorite B.K. Evenson book. I'm a huge fan of No Exit, the kind of noir alien novel that Brian wrote under the name B.K. Evenson. So, like, I'm a huge fan of that one. So I wouldn't even say Feral is my favorite of the B.K. Evenson books. And I liked it, but I think you were less into it than I was. So although I don't think it's perfect, I think we can get into those things in a little bit. But let's talk about the positives that we saw in the book first, and then we can kind of like question the things that we don't like a little bit later on, because some of those get into spoilers. And at some point, I'm going to make a spoiler cut. But yeah, once the book kind of gets going and gets into the kind of more into the apocalypse aspects, we see more aspects of it kind of becoming more of a straight, I wouldn't say straight zombie novel, but we have some of the tropes. We have like the compound that, you know, is similar to Day of the Dead, and we have, you know, we play with, you know, we have some of those tropes. So I'm wondering how you felt about how the authors here handled the standard tropes of the genre.
By that you mean, give me a little idea. Sure.
Well, I'm just wondering how you felt. Like, were you some of the things like, you know, the aspects that make a zombie novel, like
Okay.
the group dynamic and all those things. I'm just wondering how you felt those things were handled in this novel. Did it? Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
This is our first time recording together, so.
Yeah. Let's try again. I thought they were handled rather well. I think I may think of it more of a zombie novel than you did. In those particular parts, the terror of the zombie, the need for the people involved to work together, and the conflict that comes from that was all there. And because of that, I think it fit very well into the zombie aspect. I think the authors handled it very well. And I really have no complaint on that particular part.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that's kind of cool for me as a giant Brian Evenson fan is that, first of all, I love Brian's use of language, and his writing is so interesting and creative and weird. But it's kind of cool to see him just work with the genre with less artistic license almost. If you look to chapter 30, there's a page 159 in the paperback, when basically it's just a scene where Allie walks into a camp that has already been destroyed by the ferals. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just, you know, for anyone listening at home who has the book, that particular page to me did a really good job of showing tension in a very straightforward way. And it's a way that we're not used to, those of us who are big Brian Evenson fans. You know, we see glimpses of that in his work, but it always has more of a stylistic way of portraying these things. And so I kind of liked the just nitty-gritty descriptions of the camps and the way everything kind of went down. So, is there anything else you want to say before we get into spoilers, Marvin? And the spoiler-free part.
Well, yeah, spoilers are a big issue with this, reviewing this novel, and I tried very hard on my own to stay away from them. But I guess it's inevitable at some point to discuss this in detail. I do want to say that I have only read one Evenson novel, and that's Last Days. And I thought it was nothing short of incredible. And I certainly did see his style in this book. I think he did a good, even though I agree with you, it seems like he was basically hired to write this, and he is going from the structure of Demonaco, which we'll probably get into. I thought the writing on this was pretty, from what I know of Evenson, pretty close to his style, and he pretty much was true to it.
Yeah, and certainly I don't think Brian Evenson fans are going to be bummed out if they read this book. It's just, you know, I would say it's the difference between like uh, almost like an experimental musician, like playing with a rock band, you know. Because like this one is more like power chords, you know, that freeform jazz. That would be the analogy I would use. But at the same time, like the strength and the skill of him as a writer is absolutely there. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, Last Days is a fantastic novel, and if anyone's listening, like I'm gonna throw my hat in there too. That was the first Brian Evenson novel that I read as well. I continued to read on, and Immobility is my personal favorite of his novels, and probably he has a short story called Any Corpse, which is in Collapse of Horses, which is like one of the most amazing things I've read by him. So I highly recommend that to you and to everyone who's listening. Short story, Any Corpse. So let's get into spoilers. So 16-minute mark in the recording. So now we can just kind of full on talk about the ending of the book and not worry about it. Because that's where a lot of my criticism comes from, things that are spoilers. Because one of the aspects that I liked most about this novel was the idea of the battle of the sexes. However, for me, I think they went kind of light on it. Because the concept of men as a gender terrifying women in general is not that far from reality, because there's certainly women who feel that they have trouble walking down the street without being harassed, or certainly one out of every three women have been sexually assaulted, and and that kind of fear and those aspects of the story was something that I wanted to see like in the novel earlier on. I'm not sure how you felt about the exploration of those issues in the novel.
Well, I pretty much totally agree with you on that. In fact, it probably is one of my main complaints on the novel, is that the battle of the sexes thing, basically the pharaohs are taken to extreme. It battled the sexes to the extreme. Um, and we do get a character. I don't know how much spoiler you want here, but we do get a character.
Full spoiler. Let's assume that the people listening to this have either read it or they've decided they're not going to read it and they just want to hear what we have to say.
Okay, well, putting it that side, we do have a male character who comes into the novel who is not infected by the disease.
Yeah,
And, and this, to me, brought the perfect place where we could explore battle sexes, because he is the exception, but he is still in the battle, basically.
Yeah.
So
and Sam is actually a good character, and I liked him. However, I cringed a little bit when he kind of came in as the White Knight trying to save the day towards the end, because it's like I almost wish that they had kind of switched that, and I thought they were setting up a situation where Allie would be the one that would have to come in and save him at the end. And it's not that the women aren't heroic in this novel, because they are. However, there is an aspect that Sam comes and saves Allie's sister, right, towards the end. And that kind of made me uncomfortable. I don't know how you felt about that, but that was just one aspect of Sam. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marvin.
Well, introduce, and when they introduced the aspect of that individual, I did feel that they were kind of catering to the paranormal romance part, and that kind of bothered me a little bit. He, like you say, he went to White Knight,
Yeah.
and in doing so, that took away from the battle of sexes aspect and made it a bit more formula. So yes, I do have an issue with that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I think the Hollywood aspect of this novel kind of came in, and I definitely see. I don't think Sam is a bad character. In fact, there was a lot of things I liked about Sam, and I think that and if they ever do adapt this into a film, I think there's ways they could fix some of these aspects of Sam. And number one, just, making him a little less heroic and having Allie save the day would make me feel more comfortable. However, where I said earlier that I think that they didn't do enough of the Battle of the Sexes issues. However, the last scene that I dog-eared in the book, which is on page 271, is the scene where they did effectively do the whole Battle of the Sexes thing, where I think that there's a deeper interpretation to what's happening now. I'll find out when I talk to Brian today if I'm reading too much into this. But there's a scene towards the end, and I am going to read part of it, and this is major, major spoiler because I think this is the best reveal of the book. But, so what's happening in the book at this point is that they've started to notice that the Ferals are getting more organized, that they're able to function at a higher level. And we have now, at this point, they freed a bunch of women who were captured by the Ferals from different camps. And they find out that many of the women are pregnant with these feral, basically they're victims of, well, not basically, they're victims of rape from the Ferals, and some of them are pregnant. So, and the male unborn fetuses are showing signs of infection. So therefore, at this point, now this to me was probably the most disturbing part of the book. I obviously dog-eared it, and there's when Sam comes into this room and finds these women that are like tied up and they're pregnant. Like several of them say, "Please kill me, kill us," and that's when he says, "It took a moment for what the women were saying to sink in. A breeding ground," Sam realized. "This is a breeding ground for Ferals." He turned his head and peered at the other women around him. They were all looking at him now, attentive. Some of them still shaking, some of them rubbing their arms, but all listening. Women had been brought here alive, then raped and impregnated. The monsters had figured out how to perpetrate their own species. They weren't killing women, they were using them to breed. The methods were different, but it still brought back bad memories for him. "Kill us," the woman said again. And then Sam says, "I'm not here to kill you, I'm here to kill the Ferals that did this to you." Now, this scene, this is where we get into issues of my body, not yours, to issues of choice, to deeper issues where the Battle of Sexes just becomes not just a reveal, but a slap in the face, a punch in the gut in the novel. And to me, that is that is the best part of the novel and the best reveal. I don't know how you felt, but to me, that was great.
I especially liked that section myself, and it did. I think it brought out what the novel could have been.
Yeah.
What happened is it goes into more of a formalizing, climactic battle end, and it sort of watered down that part, I think, in doing that. But yes, I love that particular area, and that felt very much like Evenson.
Right, and yes, it felt very much like Evenson, the guy who writes such. I'm wondering if that wasn't an Evenson addition to the idea, because I know Demonaco said in interviews, at least one interview that I saw, that they collaborated quite heavily on the final draft. But what upset me is, or the one thing that really upsets me is, as great as that scene is, it's 271 pages into the book, and that's not. And that's out of 308, right? So that's like nearly to the end. However, I will say this. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5. And that reveal is almost entirely the reason I went from 3 to 4 stars in my head. Because that reveal was good enough that I was like, whoa, awesome moment. And as a writer, I always look for scenes or parts that make me jealous. Like, oh man, I wish I had thought of that, and that scene did it for me. But yeah, it's it's interesting because that is where we see the concept actually functioning, and that's why I think it's fair to say in a review of this, and this is where we get into issues of being a reviewer. That's why I think it's fair to say that it was a problem with the book, even though they did do the thing we wanted him to do in the end. The fact that it happened on page 271 is something that I think still makes it a valid criticism of the book. I don't know how you feel, but
Yeah, I wanted more early. Not exactly sure how I would have put it in earlier. I can't speak to that. But
yeah,
yes, I definitely wanted to see more of that.
yeah,
There, maybe, I don't know, maybe more distrust of Sam instead of being seen as a guinea pig.
right,
Um, it's hard to say. But yes, that particular part was very good and very late.
yeah, yeah. But well, that's the thing is like I do think what we want to see with horror these days is like we want to see different things and we want to see ideas expressed. And certainly with the zombie novel, you're looking for ways to um, creatively express points of view because zombie stories have always been about point of view. Just because, it all started with Night of the Living Dead in a sense, or, I mean, you could take it back to I Am Legend, but these are point of view stories. These are, message based stories. And I think the strength of the concept of feral is that that would separate it. And certainly Demonico, like, and I have to admit, I haven't seen the Purge movies, but it's clear that the Purge movies are trying to express a point of view as well. So it's clear that he's a point of view writer. And I'm only familiar with Demonico's work in the Negotiator, which I think is a very underrated action movie, actually. Um, and I admit I haven't seen the Purge movies, but this has inspired me that I am going to check them out now because I did like this enough.
Well, if I could say something about the Purge movie, that go down that they are very visceral movies. They also are very political movies,
Yeah.
and especially on the last one. Um, this book doesn't seem to have that much political, and if you equate that to Battle of the Sexes, and I guess I did want to see more of that
Yeah.
on it. Let me throw in one thing, though, that I thought was interesting, and
Sure.
that is the depiction of the women communes. What I thought was kind of interesting, I'm going to throw this out. Hopefully, we'll get too much backlash on this. But what I thought when I was reading it is this movie seemed to go a lot like Walking Dead, except that the women communes seemed a lot more cooperative than anything in The Walking Dead. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, I
Uh,
think I think honestly, and this being I'm more of a feminist than well, like I'm not very pro men, um, but I think that like this apocalypse would breed more of cooperative reaction, just because I think women would be more thoughtful about how they handle things, and I actually think Evenson and Demonaco did a pretty good job of portraying that. And believe me, I've had to think about those things because I did a zombie novel where the only people who survived were vegans, and so I had to think about how our I had to self critique the vegan community that I'm a part of and say how would we survive this, um, and I made fun of my own community quite a bit, but the reality is that it would be totally different from any other kind of zombie apocalypse if you just take men out of the equation. And in fact, they were a lot more cooperative, but that may be another aspect that I think they maybe could have been a little bit more cooperative because I do think that some of it was the women falling into traditional survivor roles that we've seen men take in these types of books before too. So, like, I would like to have seen more of a collaborative, cooperative effort for food manufacturing, which maybe happened in there, and I might be selling the novel short. But
Yeah, I do want to state that what I just said is not a critique of the novel. I'm not criticizing it for that. I just think it does show, though, the possibility of more information and more development of the battle of the sexes idea.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. All right, so we're half an hour in, so I know it goes real quick. But any last thoughts you want to give on Feral, and maybe we should end with just what else are we reading right now for anyone who made it this far, and yeah, let's do that. Let's just do what else are we reading right now kind of thing.
Okay. What do you want me to put in a couple more observations on the novel? Quickly, I would say that it basically comes down to style, which I loved. It's well written. It definitely kept my interest. Excellent action scenes versus structure, which is where I felt it come down, and where it comes down on. And when you talk to Evenson, I certainly would like to know how much structure was his or Demonaco, and how much style was his in Demonaco.
Yeah, that's in my notes. I also, because it's also interesting because it does, and it's weird we didn't mention this, but it does switch from first person to third person between different point of views.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah, but you know what? That usually I find very distracting, but this time I didn't. It was very smooth for me. I didn't feel that affected my reading experience this time. So. But I generally always prefer third person to first person as a writer and as a reader. But that's not to say that I don't like stuff that's in first person. But I just it kind of takes me out of it because then I always start thinking about, well, why would this person actually be writing this book? And then I almost feel like, well, then I know they're going to survive and things like that, which is specifically a genre thing because, like, if you read a book like Wonder Boys, you're not necessarily going to be worrying about whether he's going to live or not. Maybe you would, I don't know. But anyways, so yeah, the last thing I would say on Feral is that I think it's pretty great, and I would like to see. I know Demanaco said he could see it as a trilogy, and I'm all for it. And if they have a trilogy, it's like ways that they could expand on the concept. I would also like to see it as a film. I think it would make a great film, and I think since Blumhouse is the one that put it out, I'm sure it started as a treatment, and I think that they're just kind of. This is probably a case of them trying to save the intellectual property and make sure that nobody else jumps on this idea first. That being said, what are you reading right now, Marvin?
Well, I just got done reading Final Girls by Riley Sager, and that seems to be my rave of the year so far. Excellent mystery, suspense with a lot of horror element in it, about three girls who are basically final girls, as we use in the acronym. To use is the woman that survived in the horror film after all others are killed. And in this novel, we have three final girls who are in the real life situation become final girls, and what happens to them, and how that turned into basically a mystery and suspense novel. Aside from that, I'm currently reading Bleed by Ed Kirsch, which is a pretty gruesome novel about a stain that is growing on somebody's ceiling. And if you really like visceral type horror, body horror, this one is totally up your alley.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah, I'm reading Secrets of the Weird by Chad Stroop, who is a local San Diego author. You probably are only familiar with his work through his story in the San Diego Horror Professionals. He did have a story in both volumes and the upcoming third volume. By the way, it's coming soon. And not to plug too hard a book that I'm in, but Secrets of the Weird. This is his first novel, local author here in San Diego, and it is excellent. I'm probably 80% done. It is a kind of almost like kind of punk rock meets early Clive Barker, like kind of fantastical horror, with like, and I know it says in the book, it says a novel of transformational horror, and the main character is transgendered, and it's very delicately written, and I'm really proud of Chad as a buddy for having really pulled off a very cool book. Now, I haven't finished it yet. I've got probably 40 or 50 pages left, and but so far, so good. And just we're going to do a bunch of stuff on my blog with him around the time of his release party in July, because it's not out yet. And so I'm reading an arc of that, and it takes place in a city called Sweetville, which is like kind of a fictional city with weird monsters and this drug called sweet candy that's like pervasive in the city. And so there's dystopia, dark fantasy, all kinds of deviant, weird sexuality and transformational body horror. Very, very interesting piece of work. He's been working on it for a long time, and I just can't say enough about how good it is. So, yay, Chad! And so, those of you who made it this far listening, look out for a review and interview with the author on that. So, Marvin, this is our first time doing it. How do you feel?
I feel great.
Yeah,
Good. I never did anything like this at all, so if I stuttered or anything during it, please take that in mind.
Yeah. Well, hey, we'll keep this up because you and I read a lot of the same stuff. So, when I see that, we've read a similar book, I will be calling and we'll be doing this again. And since we're both friends on Goodreads, everybody can, and readers follow us on Goodreads, follow our blogs, and, we try to expand the genre all the time. Both of us believe in the bookosphere and supporting authors and getting the word out. So here's the other thing, too. If you have a book you want us to review, Marvin is an e-reader. I am not. I am a hardcover reader. And so if you want us to review your work, just send us an email and we'll look at what you got. And generally my rule is that if you send me a hardcover, I promise you I'll review anything. If you send, or a hard copy, excuse me, not a hardcover, hard copy. If you send me an ebook, I may get to it because I do have a Kindle. I just don't like reading on it. I'm very tactile. So, anyways, so keep that in mind, people. But I know both of us are open to new authors and reading new things. So we will guarantee one thing only, an honest review in that sense. So thank you for joining me, Marvin. And
you're welcome.
Later, folks.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yep. Alrighty. Hold on. Okay, we are stopped.
Okay.